weekly plunge into fish keeping. Welcome to the Aquarium Hour.
Hi everyone, I'm Maria Garcia, and I run what my followers lovingly call the Fish Tank reality show on social media. I've been living the daily drama of aquarium life for about 8 years now.
Mike Sullivan here. Been keeping tanks clean and fish happy for 23 years now. Started as a maintenance tech and never looked back. If there's a way to mess up an algae situation, I've either done it myself or helped someone fix it.
Oh Mike, I love that introduction. Speaking of algae situations, I just had a viewer panic about their tank turning into what they called an emerald apocalypse overnight. It got me thinking, we really need to address the whole algae is evil mindset in the hobby.
That's actually a perfect starting point. You know what's funny? In all my years of maintenance work, I've never seen a completely algae-free tank that was also healthy. A little bit of the green stuff is actually a good sign.
Exactly. It's like having a tiny lawn in your aquarium. But I think we should break this down for folks. There's good algae, bad algae, and then there's the, oh my goodness, what is that kind. Want to help me categorize these for our listeners?
Well, let's start with the good guys. You've got your basic green algae that grows on rocks and glass. That thin, velvety coating. That stuff's actually beneficial. It provides grazing for fish and helps process nutrients. Plus, it's easy to control with regular maintenance.
And don't forget about the beautiful red coralline algae in saltwater tanks. That's the stuff reef keepers actually want to grow. I remember doing a whole episode on my channel about a viewer who was trying to remove it, thinking it was bad. Their more experienced friend nearly had a heart attack.
Oh man. That reminds me of a client who tried to scrub off their coralline with vinegar. I had to explain that they just removed about 6 months of beneficial growth. But let's talk about the troublemakers. Blackbeard algae, hair algae, and the dreaded blue-green algae, which isn't even really algae.
The imposter. Cyanobacteria masquerading as algae. You know what's fascinating? Some of my viewers actually started calling it the tank criminal, because of how it sneaks in and takes over. But Mike, what's your take on the sudden explosions? Why does a tank go from crystal clear to green soup overnight?
The infamous green water syndrome. 9 times out of 10, it's a perfect storm of too much light, excess nutrients, and an imbalance in the tank's ecosystem. Think of it like leaving a buffet out in the sun. Something's gonna grow. The key is understanding that algae is just doing its job, consuming excess nutrients that could harm your fish.
That's such a great way to put it. I actually did an experiment on my channel where I set up 2 identical tanks, one with perfect parameters and one with slightly elevated nitrates. The difference after 2 weeks was incredible. The high nitrate tank looked like pea soup.
You know what's funny about that? In nature, that green water would be feeding thousands of tiny organisms. In fact, some fish breeders intentionally grow green water to feed fry. It is all about context. What's a nuisance in our display tanks is actually liquid gold in the right situation.
Oh, that reminds me of something fascinating. Did you know some high-end koi breeders actually monitor their algae levels to ensure optimal growth conditions for their fish? It's like they're farming the algae alongside their koi.
Makes perfect sense. Those prize koi need pristine water conditions, and algae can be a great natural filter. But here's where people often get it wrong. They see algae and immediately reach for the chemicals. That's like taking antibiotics for a hangnail, completely overdoing it.
I'm guilty of that one. Early in my fish keeping journey, I nuked a tank with algicide. Killed the algae all right, along with half my beneficial bacteria. The ammonia spike that followed was not fun to deal with. What would you recommend instead?
Start with the basics. Light control, proper feeding, regular water changes. Think of algae as a symptom, not the disease. If you've got an algae problem, something else is out of whack. Usually, it's as simple as too much light or overfeeding.
Let's talk about some natural solutions. I've had amazing success with cleanup crews. My army of Amano shrimp are like tiny landscapers, constantly manicuring the tank. And don't get me started on neurite snails. They're like the vacuum cleaners of the aquarium world.
Those Amanos are worth their weight in gold. But here's a pro tip. Don't just throw cleaners at the problem. I had a client who bought 50 nerite snails for a 20-gallon tank. Once they cleaned up the algae, they started starving. You need to find the right balance.
Oh no, poor snails. That's actually a great point about balance. I think we sometimes forget that our tanks are miniature ecosystems. Everything's connected. The fish, the plants, the algae, even the microscopic stuff we can't see.
Exactly. And sometimes, what looks like an algae problem is actually the tank trying to reach that balance. I've seen new tanks go through an ugly phase before settling into a beautiful, stable system. Patience is seriously underrated in this hobby.
Speaking of patience, can we talk about prevention? I always tell my viewers that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, especially with algae. What's your maintenance routine like?
Regular water changes, consistent lighting schedule, and, proper filtration maintenance. But here's something people often overlook. Test your source water. I had a client fighting algae for months until we discovered their tap water was loaded with phosphates.
That's such a good point. I actually keep a log of my tap water parameters because they change seasonally. But let's talk about fertilizers. There's so much confusion about whether they cause or prevent algae.
Now that's a complicated one. Proper fertilization actually helps prevent algae by keeping your plants healthy enough to outcompete it, but overdoing it is like giving algae an all-you-can-eat buffet. It's all about finding that sweet spot.
I love how this all comes back to balance. Maybe we should start thinking of algae less as an apocalypse and more as, what would you call it, Mike? A canary in the coal mine?
That's exactly what it is. Nature's warning system. If you've got an algae outbreak, your tank is trying to tell you something. Listen to it, make adjustments, and work with your system instead of against it.
I think that's the perfect way to wrap this up. Algae isn't our enemy. It's more like an opinionated neighbor who lets you know when something's not quite right in the neighborhood. Thanks for sharing all your insights today, Mike. This has been incredibly enlightening.
Thanks for swimming with us on the Aquarium Hour. Until next time.